The weight of a crown is not measured in gold, but in the lives it breaks. In the silent, cavernous halls of the Imperial Court, where every whisper carries the weight of a death warrant, a tragedy once unfolded that would redefine the meaning of blood and betrayal. Imagine standing before the most powerful man on earth, your own father, watching as the brother who shared your cradle, the man you trusted with your life, weaves a web of lies designed to send you to the executioner's block. This is not just a chronicle of a lost title. It is a descent into the darkest corners of the human psyche, where ambition suffocates empathy and the hunger for power transforms a brother into a monster. They say that kings may forget and brothers may lie, but the throne itself possesses a long, haunting, and terrifying memory. If you find yourself drawn to the shadows of history and the complex truths behind the world's most powerful dynasties, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We bring the past back to life, one forgotten secret at a time. Join us as we journey into a story of absolute power and ultimate betrayal. The court of King Valerius was a place where silence was often louder than speech, a labyrinth of cold stone and flickering candlelight where every shadow seemed to have ears. In this world of whispered allegiances and sharp steel, Elian, the eldest prince, moved with a quiet, deliberate grace. He was a man of the library and the frontier, a prince who believed that leadership was not a prize to be snatched, but a heavy mantle to be carried with dignity. Beside him, always, was Cassian, the younger brother by a mere 11 months. They were once inseparable, two halves of a single soul who had weathered the storms of their father's volatile, near-mad temper together. As children, they had made a pact in the dusty corners of the royal nursery, promising that no crown and no amount of gold would ever sever the bond of their blood. But the human heart is a treacherous landscape, and when the horizon of power begins to loom, even the strongest foundations can crumble into dust. As King Valerius descended into the winter of his life, his mind became a fractured mirror of its former self. Paranoia, sharp and jagged, began to take root. He saw assassins in the steam of his soup and traitors in the smiles of his advisors. This was the toxic soil in which Cassian's envy began to grow. It wasn't a sudden rot. It was a slow, creeping vine that strangled his empathy day by day. Cassian began to look at Elian not as a protector, but as an obstacle. Every time the council praised Elian's steady hand in governance or his strategic brilliance in settling border disputes, a new scar formed on Cassian's pride. He began to wonder why a few months of birth order should dictate the destiny of a lifetime. He felt the weight of being the second son, a shadow destined to fade as soon as the firstborn ascended. The psychological toll of this perceived inferiority twisted his love into a sharp, cold weapon. The betrayal did not happen in the dark of night with a dagger. It happened in the clinical, terrifying brightness of the midday sun within the great hall of the throne. Elian had spent weeks drafting a peace treaty with the southern duchies, a document that would ensure generations of prosperity. He had shared every draft, every secret negotiation, and every private fear with Cassian, trusting him as his shadow. He did not know that his brother was meticulously rewriting the narrative. Cassian had spent those same weeks in the king's private chambers during the late feverish hours of the night. He whispered to the dying monarch about Elian's secret meetings with foreign spies. He spoke of Elian's supposed impatience for the king's death and a plot to seize the throne before the spring thaw. Cassian didn't just tell lies, he manufactured truth. When the day of the public hearing arrived, Elian walked into the hall with the serene confidence of a man who has served his kingdom well. He expected to present his treaty and receive his father's final blessing. Instead, he found a room frozen in a chilling, breathless anticipation. The king sat upon the high throne, his eyes clouded with a terrifying mixture of grief and senile fury. Before Elian could utter a word of greeting, Cassian stepped forward, his face a masterpiece of practiced sorrow. He held a bundle of letters, documents written in Elian's own calligraphy, stamped with Elian's private seal, yet filled with words of high treason that Elian had never even thought, let alone penned. They were masterful forgeries, detailing a plan to imprison the king in the Black Spire and bypass the traditional laws of succession. The psychological weight of the moment was suffocating. Elian looked at the letters, then at his brother, searching for a flicker of the boy who had once shared his bread. He found only a stranger with eyes like flint. The court watched in silence as Cassian knelt before their father, his voice trembling with a counterfeit agony as he confessed that his conscience could no longer bear the weight of his brother's dark ambitions. He painted himself as the reluctant whistleblower, the loyal son forced to choose between his sibling and his sovereign. It was a performance that would have made the finest playwright weep. The king, already pushed to the brink by age and the fear of his own mortality, did not ask for a defense. He did not look for the truth behind his eldest son's eyes. He only saw the betrayal he had been conditioned by his own paranoia to expect. As the heavy iron shackles were clamped onto Elian's wrists, the sound echoed through the hall like a death knell. Elian did not fight. He did not scream. He simply stood there, his gaze locked on Cassian with a profound, haunting realization of the depth of his brother's transformation. He was stripped of his signet ring, his sword, and his birthright in a matter of minutes. The king's decree was swift. Elian was to be cast into the deepest oubliette of the fortress, to await an execution that would serve as a warning to all who dared covet the crown. However, as the guards dragged Elian toward the heavy oak doors, a sudden, sharp gasp rippled through the gathered nobles. The king, overcome by the emotional violence of the scene, collapsed forward, his crown clattering across the stone floor and rolling to a stop at Cassian's feet. In the ensuing chaos, as physicians rushed forward, Cassian reached down to pick up the crown. But as his fingers brushed the gold, he realized the room had gone silent again. Standing in the shadow of the throne was the king's blind archivist, a man who had been forgotten in the corner. The old man held a small, vibrating glass vial, a device used to detect the unique resonance of specific seals. He looked toward the guards and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of the ages. "The ink on those letters is fresh, but the seal is a ghost. There is a third brother in this room that no one has mentioned." The great hall fell into a silence so absolute, it felt as though the very air had turned to ice. The blind archivist, a man whose family had guarded the Empire's secrets for 4 generations, stood unmoved as the royal physicians hovered over the fallen king. Cassian, still clutching the crown he had so greedily retrieved from the floor, felt a cold sweat prickling his spine. The Archivist's words about a third brother echoed like a curse. There were only 2 sons of Valerius. The queen had died shortly after Cassian's birth, yet the old man's sightless eyes seemed to bore through the younger prince's soul. He explained, in a voice like dry parchment, that the seal pressed into the forged letters was not Elian's current signet. It was a replica of a seal that had been struck from the records 40 years ago, the seal of the king's own brother, a man who had vanished under mysterious circumstances just before Valerius ascended the throne. Cassian's face drained of color. In his desperate search for a tool to destroy Elian, he had broken into the deepest, most forbidden vaults of the palace, stealing an ancient signet he believed was merely an old version of the royal crest. He had unknowingly resurrected a ghost. The Archivist revealed that the third brother was the memory of the king's own original sin. Valerius had framed his own brother for a crime he didn't commit to secure his path to the crown. By using that specific seal, Cassian hadn't just framed Elian. He had inadvertently forced the king to look into a mirror of his own darkest past. The psychological impact on the dying king was catastrophic. As Valerius regained consciousness, his eyes were no longer clouded by senility, but sharpened by a terrifying, lucid recognition. He saw in Cassian the monster he had once been, and in Elian he saw the innocent brother he had betrayed decades ago. The king was carried to his bedchambers, but he refused to let the guards take Elian back to the oubliette. Instead, both brothers were summoned to his bedside for a final, harrowing confrontation. The room smelled of lavender and the metallic tang of death. Valerius, his voice a ragged whisper, looked at Cassian, who was still desperately trying to maintain his facade of loyalty. The king didn't ask for a confession. He simply reached out and took the crown from Cassian's trembling hands. He spoke of the weight of the gold, how it had burned his brow for 40 years, with the guilt of a brother's blood. He realized that the ambition he had fostered in Cassian was a poison that would dissolve the empire from within. The psychological tension was thick as the king turned his gaze to Elian, who stood silent, his wrists still raw from the shackles. Elian didn't ask for vengeance. He only looked at his father with a profound, weary pity that cut deeper than any blade. In his final act of sovereignty, King Valerius did something no one expected. He did not order Cassian's execution. He knew that for a man like Cassian, death was too simple an escape. Instead, he dictated a final decree that stripped Cassian of his name, his titles, and his memory. He was to be cast out of the city, forbidden from ever speaking or being spoken to, a living ghost wandering the very lands he had hoped to rule. The betrayal was complete, but the roles had reversed. As the guards dragged a screaming, pleading Cassian from the room, the king placed the crown into Elian's hands. But as Elian's fingers closed around the cold metal, he felt no triumph. He only felt the crushing gravity of a legacy built on lies, and the realization that the throne he now held was a seat of perpetual mourning. The king died as the sun began to dip below the horizon, leaving Elian alone in the flickering candlelight. The coronation was a somber affair, held in a city that whispered of the brother who had vanished into the wilderness and the king who had died of a broken conscience. Elian proved to be a just ruler, but the shadows of the palace never truly left him. He never married, and he never sired an heir. fearing that the same rot of ambition would eventually claim his own children. He spent his nights in the library with the blind archivist, studying the histories of those who came before him, searching for a way to cleanse the blood from the stones of the great hall. The throne had remembered the crime of the father, and it had exacted its price through the sons. Years later, a traveler spoke of a ragged man seen on the edge of the southern deserts, a man who carried a wooden bowl and never spoke, but who would weep uncontrollably whenever he saw a carriage bearing the royal crest. Back in the capital, King Elian sat upon his high seat, a man beloved by his people, but isolated by his truth. The final twist of the story lay not in the betrayal itself, but in the enduring nature of the throne. On his own deathbed, Elian ordered that the ancient seal Cassian had used be melted down and forged into the base of the throne itself. He wanted every future king to feel the slight, uneven bump of that hidden metal beneath them, a physical reminder that power gained through the suffering of one's own kin is a throne built on sand. History teaches us that the pursuit of power often costs us the very things that make life worth living: trust, family, and peace of mind. True strength lies not in the height of one's throne, but in the integrity of the heart that sits upon it. Ambition without empathy is merely a slow-acting poison. If you are moved by this journey into the dark heart of royalty, please subscribe to our channel and share this story.